The TAT. The TAT is probably the one you need to know the most about, and because it's very, very unlikely that in the comps you'll be asked questions about particular interpretations, what they'll actually be more looking for, and I remember at least one question when I took the comps last year that was about the theory behind the TAT. So I'll go into that. So the TAT was developed by Murray in 1943. It's a series of black and white pictures where the individual has to tell a story about what is there. According to the theory, it looks at drives, emotions, feelings, complexities, and personality conflicts that are in the person. There's also, as I mentioned before, a version for children, the CAT, and for older adults, the senior apperception task. So the TAT actually has 20 different black and white cards, and some of them are for boys, specifically for girls, others are for males and females. So you'll see, for instance, a card that says 8BM. So that's, or 3BM. That means it's card 3, and it's for boys and males. So you'll see some cards that are like BM, some are GF, and some are BG. So those are the ones that are made specifically for younger people. Usually the way it's done is that the examiner selects 10 cards. So again, that's a source of variability in giving the test. It's not like the Rorschach where you have the same 10 cards, you give it to everyone, always in the same order. Here, you have 20 cards to choose from, and you have to choose 10. There's a lot of research. There are suggestions about which ones are the ones that should be given and in what order. For instance, Bellac, who's one of the people that has written and done a lot of research on the TAT, suggests this order of cards. So 1, 2, 3BM, 4, 6BM, 7GF, 8BM, 9GF, 10, and 13MF for everyone. Studies looking at what clinicians actually do have shown that 1, 2, 3BM, 3GF, 4, 5, 6BM, 6GF, 8BM, and 8GF are the most given. But there's also a lot of discrepancy. So what I do, and what I know a lot of psychologists that use this technique do, is they do the clinical interview and they figure out, okay, what do I want to get out of giving the TAT? And they choose cards that are appropriate for that.
So for the purposes of the comps, do we need to know what each card is? Like, do we need to know what a 3BM is and what the respective card it is?
I don't. The question was if for the comps you need to know exactly, identify the cards and be able to tell what they are. I really don't think so. If you've given it once, you probably are familiar with some of them, but I don't think that it'll necessarily be a requirement that you have to know it. Right? However, it is sort of important to know there are some consensus in terms of what cards are most given, even though there's variability. So when you're thinking about the validity of the test, that's a source of variability. Mm-hmm.
So it says only 10 are presented, so that's always the case? Nobody ever gives more than that?
The way so the question is if nobody ever gives more than 10 cards, and there's huge variability. Because many people don't use a standardized way of analyzing these cards, they just sort of look at the themes that arise. They can give less cards, they can give more cards. Oftentimes people give some TAT cards and some cards from other tests, such as the CAT, in order to get at what they need. So yeah, a lot of people will give 6, 7, or 8 cards, and other people will give more.
Oh.
But according to Bellac's instructions and Murray's conception of the test, 10 cards are given. Are there any other questions? So the TAT was developed based on Murray's theories and concepts of personality. which, I mean, it's important to note because that influences the type of things that you're looking at and the research that has been done about it. I'm thinking, like, in a way similar to the Milan inventories, where, like, it's not based on DSM, it's going to be based on Milan's theories of personality. Here, it's based on Murray's conceptions of personality, and so that's what it was developed to be looking at. Murray's concepts of personality, this is something you definitely will need to know. I definitely remember being asked a question about this, is what he calls the needs-press theory. Needs are drives within the person that influence motivation. So they're, it's what the person needs to get from their environment and from other people. Murray identified 28 distinct needs. And so a lot of the TAT is about getting what are the needs that are met, what are the needs that are not met. And then press are the forces in a person's environment. He identified 24 different press. And so really Murray sees conflicts in personality as seeing a constant struggle between needs and press. So there's certain needs that we're getting, but at the same time there are different pulls by our environment. So how are we going to mediate the press in order to get our needs met? Sometimes they're not. You can't hold both, and that gives rise to a lot of intrapsychic conflict.
Are there examples of this that you can?
Examples.
Yeah, because I'm having a difficult time conceptualizing it.
Okay, so for instance, this might not be exactly one of the needs and press that are part of these 828 or 24 distinct ones. But for instance, I'm thinking of a child that has poor cognitive ability or has a lot of motivation to succeed academically. And really wants to achieve something, and like maybe the parents are there, but they live in a situation that doesn't really foster that type. So the teachers are not necessarily being very receptive. That's press. So they're the forces in the environment that are pushing and pulling for something that are at conflict with this individual's needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And of course, we all want to get our needs met, as many as we can, but oftentimes the forces, press, can either push us to do so, like for instance in the case of we're in an environment where there's a lot of pressure to achieve something, then maybe press and needs are going to be in line. But oftentimes what causes conflict is when they're not. Murray also has the concept of a thema, I don't know how you would pronounce that, which is a small unity of behavior that results from the interactions between needs and press. So, like we talked about how oftentimes needs and press are going to be relating to the same thing and are going to be in conflict, so that unity of needs and press and the way they interact is the thema. As you can see, as you can imagine, the idea of the TAT is to look at the different themas that come up. And then if the themas come up are in different situations, we can call them a serial thema, which is sort of more ingrained and pervades more than just a specific thema. Mm-hmm.
So just to conceptualize this, so maybe the formula you can say needs plus press equals thema?
As long as they have it's in the same realm, yes. So needs and a thema has a particular needs and a particular press that are interacting. That's about all you need to know about that. And the question might come up, what are needs usually countered on in Murray's conception of personality in the TAT, and like the right answer would be press. I think that was what we got. But probably not more than that. If you're interested in this, there's a book by Belak called the TAT, SAT, and CAT in clinical practice, and he goes into this in great detail.
Might it be wise to look at, for example, it said 28 needs. Might it be wise to look through those to see what those are, just to be familiar?
I wouldn't necessarily emphasize looking at the different, going more in depth about it. I mean, it's definitely interesting, but I doubt that they would be asking things in that level of depth in the comps. But it might. Like, this entire theory is considered to be part of, what you need to know. Why did I put this here? Murray's administration instructions for the TAT. As you can see, he introduces as a test of imagination, calling it intelligence, and really after that, which a lot of people actually have shifted and don't do, because saying that it's an intelligence test makes people very anxious. So there is quite a bit of difference in administration instructions, and it's not like the Rorschach, where you have to give the standard set of instructions for it to be valid. So like, say for the Rorschach, if you say, what is this? Your test is not really going to be valid, because the demand is different. For the Rorschach, you say, what might this be? And that's what you have to say. Murray's instructions are here. You can read through them, but there's considerable variation. Really, what's important to know is that you have to say, I'm going to show you some pictures. Tell me what you see, what is happening. Make sure it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Actually, that's from the Themas. And say what the characters are thinking, feeling, and doing. Also, he says, you have 50 minutes. There's 10 pictures, so you have about 5 minutes each. Again, that's something that a lot of people skip and don't say, just because they want to make sure that people don't have that much to say. It's not, and also because 50 minutes to administer this seems like a lot. Even Murray said for children or people with cognitive problems, this set of instructions are probably going to be a little too hard for them to understand. So he says you can simplify them, you can change them. Again, different than, say, the WISC, where you have to say the right thing at the right time for it to be valid. That's, again, something different set of administration instructions do have some impact and validity, but it's really not looked at that way for these. Questions? Uh-huh.
It's interesting how he says as dramatic a story as you can think of.
Mm-hmm. So it is. I agree. It is interesting, and it's definitely pulling for people to really project a lot more by asking people to make dramatic stories. The idea is you're not going to say, "Oh, it's a child looking at a violin," but rather like put a lot more feeling into it. Again, a lot of people skip that nowadays just because you don't want to put a lot of... If people want to make a very dramatic story, they might actually put stuff that's not really from themselves. They'll just talk about, what would make this story more dramatic. It's like, well, it's this conflict and like thinking of like old movies that they saw, and they'll make it like a sob story, and then, well, that's not really what's going on for them. They're just trying to make it dramatic. So there's pluses and minuses to a lot of this. I think I went over this. In general, what you want to make sure, and this is regardless of what storytelling task, usually you want to make sure, tell them that you want to know what's going on, what people are thinking and feeling, how they got there, and and what happened next. And oftentimes, it's completely valid and in a way expected that if somebody doesn't give a full answer encompassing these things, it's completely normal for the examiner to ask. So what happened next, or what happened before, or what are they thinking? This is especially the case because at least in Bellac's scoring system, there's a lot of emphasis on who the hero is, who the main character is, and how the conflicts are resolved. Might touch on that in a little bit. Questions? So I've alluded to the fact that part of the issues of validity with these tests are that there are a lot of different scoring systems. Some people don't even use scoring systems. They'll just do their own content analysis based on their clinical impressions. In trying to make this more psychometrically sound, Belak, who I've mentioned before in terms of that book, has a scoring system that is probably the most widely talked about. So if you read the TAT chapter in the Handbook of Psychological Assessment, they will talk a little bit more about Belak's system than others. And it's completely based on psychoanalytic theory. Has anyone actually used Belak's scoring system? What did you think about that?
I probably used some more clinical. It was helpful in terms of organizing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been a long time. But it was helpful sort of organizing the answers and to kind of help you find things, but I also found it kind of easier to be able to relate it back to the person and interpret it that way.
So, like you're saying that it was good as a starting point, but you wouldn't just use that. You'd
Yeah.
go sort of beyond that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. There's a part of it that has like a checklist for defense mechanisms that you might or might not have seen. So you're like, oh, projective identification, check. Repression, check. So a lot of it's very, very psychoanalytic, very focused on, family of origin and issues around that. I think there's also a little checkbox for like castration anxiety, something along that. So anyway, it's not very used, but it's important that you know that it's out there because it is the one that has been mostly used and most studied. Conceptualized of parental figures, shocking, Oedipus and whatnot, defenses, and the adequacy of the superego. So part of Belak's bit system says, is this a superego? Is this the ego? What's going on? Another less used but also talked about system of interpretation is Weston's, and that one's based on object relations. Again, so still psychodynamic theory, but it's about the internal representations of significant others, and then it looks at the quality of the affect in the relationships, the capacity for emotional investment and moral integrity, and understanding the extent to which a person can understand interpersonal motivations. As we can start seeing about the TAT from what it's looking at, it's mostly useful for looking at interpersonal situations and the person's view of other people. Research on the TAT has looked at aggression and hostility, motivation and apperception, and coping. So a lot of different research about this. This test is really old. It looks really old. A lot of people will actually comment on that when you're giving it to them. It's like, why is everyone here white? And why does this look like it's from a scene from Casablanca? It's like, well, it was made in 1946. What can we expect? So, cultural problems with that, yes, everyone is white. And yes, it seems like it is a 1940s film. It's like very longing faces, it's a little antiquated. There's always talk about, why don't they just make this, they update this? But they haven't. I don't know if they will. I have an entire sort of section on interpretation. I'm probably not going to go through all of these slides in a lot of detail just because it's probably more than what you actually need. The interpretation scheme that I used for this presentation is based on the Essentials book on TAT and projective storytelling techniques. I'll just briefly say the things that I think are important to keep in mind, because one way or another, they can come up, and they can come up in the test. So these are some components that are useful to look at when doing interpretation on the TAT. What is going on, right? Very, very straightforward. Is there a dilemma? Is there something that needs to be solved? Focusing on the main character, or the hero, as Belak would call it, what is their intention? What do they want? The complication. Why are they not able to get what they want? Can we see, can we see here how it's their intention being their needs, and the complication being the press. And then means, what they do about it, and what the outcome is. So a lot of times, I think the outcome is some of the most important things, especially for children, being like, wow, okay, so all the outcomes are negative, or all the outcomes are unrealistic, or in all of these, it's sort of a magical resolution where they had no agency in it whatsoever. So these are the different important elements to look at. And there are also different, when we're looking at responses to the TAT, we can look at them in different general fields. So the first one that I'm going to talk a little bit about, and again, I know I'm moving quick, but that's because I don't think it's that essential to like keep this all to memory for the comps. But so there's a cognitive piece. You know, how are they able to get information in, and how are they able to process it? So it's more on the less on the internal drives and motivations and latent contact, and it's more like, well, how are they able to perceive this? How are they able to make a story out of this? Are they going off what it says there, or what's in the stimulus, or are they just going there and taking it somewhere else that has nothing to do with it? Say, the for card 1, which I'm assuming that's the one that most people remember, which is the boy with the violin. Like, maybe they'll start, talking about, oh, there's this child and there's a violin, and then they had issues about the war, and they came back and hurt, and then they're like, well, whoa, that's not really in the card at all. So how discrepant or inappropriate it is, and then if they do get out of the card and make this a big elaborate story, do they come back? So like, sort of taking that example further, there's this child, his parents are in the military, they left the child alone with a one wish that like all he had to do is play the violin, and in the war this happened, and they go on for like 5 or 10 minutes, and they're like, and then they came back and told this to the child, and that's why he's staring at the violin. So like, do they go back to the card? Do they not? So a lot of like thought process, thought content issues. Is it discrepant or not appropriate for the stimulus? Is it very literal? A lot of adults give very literal issues. People with cognitive problems do too. Oh, it's a boy staring at a violin. Okay, yes, that is what it is. Is it imprecise? Do they go off it? Is it accurate? Do they have concrete or abstract thinking? Then this gives an issue at information processing, how they plan. Can they plan to tell a story, like in their mind, or do they just ramble and ramble? Is there coherence, and like how they coordinate different aspects of their experience?
So I have a question. In regards to all the cards are in black and white, and so like looking at like the Rorschach, where there's like kind of the color shock at the very end, it's supposed to help. So why, do you know anything as far as why is a TAT just in black and white? Right? Because some of those pictures are also based upon paintings that are in color.
So the question was like, is there a reason for it to be in black and white? I don't really know. I can speculate that it's because that way there's more to put in, because there's no color, there's less demands on the story. But I'm actually not sure. For all I know, it could have been because in 1946 it was very expensive to print things in color. So yeah, I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, I'll skip over this. You can look at it. There are like different aspects of cognition that you can look at. So another important thing is affect. So you look at the main character or whoever is there. What sort of affect is there? Is it like, can they name the particular affective experience? Can they describe it? Does it come from within, from without? How do they cope with it? Is it a very painful affect? How do they talk about the affect? And then, is their affect developmentally appropriate? For the affect that a 13-year-old is going to name should be different than a depressed 40-year-old. Another thing that we've sort of already looked at is looking at object relations. So a lot of the cards have different people in it. How are these persons' ways of relating to other people? Are the people autonomous and respect other people? Are they very dependent? Are they detached from other people and people are described separately? Are they, how related are these people? What type of relations do they have? Another one is sort of motivation and self-regulation, which is, does the main character or the character that is, or the hero, do they have certain goals or motivations in the card? How are those being played about? Do they have goals? How are they regulating themselves in order to achieve those goals? Are they planning? Are they self-monitoring? Do they do it themselves, or does it come from somewhere else? And these slides are on Moodle, by the way. Okay. Are any questions about that? That's just sort of like a brief overview of the things that different types of interpretations that can come up. So in any of those domains, from object relations, motivation, affect, and cognition. Okay, so when deciding what cards to give to somebody, and it's useful to look at what the cards typically call for and then choose them based on that. That's what a lot of people do. So if you're going to give the TAT, you should know that every card has a particular theme that is most often associated with it. So, for instance, and I'll just, here I have just the basic 10 cards that are often most given, and just so you get a sense of, what type of things come up more, or what sort of scenes it is. And I'll assume that you've seen the cards, so maybe talking about it will jog some memories of what the 10 cards that are most often given are. So card 1 is the one with the child and the violin, and so the common plots are, it's a child that is daydreaming about becoming a violinist. Another one that's very common is it's a boy that is being forced by their parents or another authority figure to play the violin. So themes that come out of this one are things such as relationship to authority figures or drives and motivations and how they're going to get there. Card 2, that's the one where there's it's like a farm scene, and there's a girl with books sort of in the front, and then there's I think there's a horse, and there's a man there without a shirt on. So that one, the most common theme or plot is that it's a young girl that is leaving the farm to seek education and increase her opportunities, while the family is portrayed as hardworking, and there the most common themes are views about education, about reading, and about family relationships. Card 3, BM, is the one where there's this, I guess that's like a person, kind of, it looks like she's, you can always hear her back, she's on like a stoop, some sort, and there's this object, ambiguous object that she's next to her hand. So it's an common themes are individuals that are emotionally involved with another person, so it's like a lot of feelings of guilt over past behavior, like she's ruminating. Interesting is whether there's this ambiguous object that I mentioned, is do they see it, a lot of people see it as a gun or as keys that she's looking at, and that's when I said drug users will often see a hypodermic syringe. Although more often than not, the answer that I've gotten for this card is, it's this girl that got a little too drunk going around to the mission, and she couldn't get her door open, and so she just fell asleep in her doorstep. Yeah, this shows yes, these are common themes, but they're not the only themes that come up, and a lot of it is context dependent. if you're giving this card to a, let's say like a, born again 50-year-old, chances are the themes of like drunkenness and passing out are not going to come up. But if you give it to like a 24-year-old that has an active social life and lives in the mission, this is something he probably sees every day, or at least every weekend, in himself or others. So anyway, like it's important to keep in mind the context. Card 4. These is like a man and a woman, and it seems like the woman is holding the man back. So usually it's a woman giving advice or restraining the man, and it's important to look at why it is. That gives a sense of how they see relationships. Card 6 is the one where you have the man there's a woman looking out the window and there's another younger looking man. That's often seen as a son giving sad news to his mother. Again, it brings out family relationships. Card 7 GF. It's usually a mother and a daughter, with a mother being like advising, consoling, or scolding her daughter. Again, it brings up issues around womanhood and motherhood. Card 8 BM is one that's kind of creepy because it's a little boy, and then in the background it's like operating table, and it looks really gruesome. And it's either themes of like aggression and killing and murder, or it can be ambition. It's a kid that's daydreaming about being a doctor because he wants to help people. So again, you can see that some themes are drawn out in several of these, such as like motivation or aggression or family figures. Card 9 GF. I don't even remember which one that is, but it tends to provide shallow stories, no general plot, so it makes me wonder, why is this part of the standard cards given? Card 10 usually shows a greeting or departure between two people, brings about issues with families, with like peer relationships. And card 13, MF. So usually plots center on illicit sexual activity. It's the one where there's a woman lying down, potentially naked, and there's a man sort of getting up and leaving, and I think he has his hand on his forehead. Sometimes the woman is portrayed as dead, and the man is grieving. Sometimes it's just like an affair. That's what it means by illicit sexual activity. I feel like just the fact that the source that I looked at this is calls it illicit sexual activity shows how antiquated a lot of this is and how it's not really modernized for the times. Again, that's an issue that will affect the reliability and validity of it.
Before we continue, what about is it card 16, the blank card?
So the blank card there is a card that is just completely blank, and oftentimes it has such little demands and it's so ambiguous that a lot of people might have issues with that, but it also is supposed to bring out you can make up whatever you want, and it requires a lot more creativity. I've never read any studies or more advice about using that card. As far as I know, it tends to be used a lot less. I like using the one with there's a bunch of men lying down, because depending on the people, a lot of sexual themes come up. Like big orgies and fun stuff like that. So I like using that one particularly. Oh dear, if this is online, that's going to be embarrassing.